My topic it's about structural change and technological change, and I included a bonus track because I am going to be talking also about the political economy and the political consequences of gender-biased structural and technological changes. So let me get everybody in the room on the same page. We are going to talk about structural change that is widely defined as employment and transitions from agriculture to manufacturing and services, and is basically set at the heart of dynamic processes of economic development. The canonical processes from structural change that we see how employment transitions from agriculture to manufacturing, then a shape the evolution of manufacturing to finally get into services, are driven by men. When we look at female data on structural change, we see that women first transition out of the agricultural employment, then they exit the paid workforce, they remain a little bit out of the workforce, and then it's at later stages of structural change that they re-enter paid workforce, mostly in the service sector. I'm going to talk also about technological change. We can think of technological change from many different dimensions. We can think of technological change as washing machines, these different care, household machines, devices that make unpaid work easier. We can also think of technological change as birth control pill. But in this case, what I'm going to focus on is technological change defined as shifts of the frontier between tasks performed by humans and machines. I will really be focusing on technological change in the production function. Technological change and structural changes are complex processes embedded in gender systems that tackle two different dimensions of different economic processes and phenomena, like economic development, secularization, and also societal dimensions from race and education attainment, urbanization, and fertility, as I was talking before about the birth control pill and so on. The gender-neutral analysis of structural change and technological change should not be the default. Gender gaps are not only a social issue, but also a macroeconomic one. I am here in order to convince you about this. Full disclosure, I was not trained as a macroeconomist. I was trained as a political economist. So I'm going to show to you some work that I'm doing on the political consequences of structural change and technological change. We are witnesses how liberal democracies are challenged by job displacing effects of structural change and technological change. And this is fueling the rise of radical and far-right. Labor market outcomes affect political attitudes, and this differs by gender. So I'm gonna I'm gonna address these three different dimensions through papers that I've been working over the last 3 years. I'm going to be very, very systematic. I'm going to present you the paper, then the puzzle, data, methods, results, puzzle, data, methods, results, until the last part of the presentation when I will wrap up with conclusions and for the debate. So the first paper that I'm going to present to you is called Structural Change and Gender Sectoral Segregation in Sub-Saharan African Countries. Structural change has been really addressing a lot of attention from scholars, and the processes in sub-Saharan Africa countries has been widely analyzed. It's been widely analyzed how productivity levels, productivity growth rates, and sectoral gaps in productivity have occurred in sub-Saharan African countries, as demonstrating these for super deep analysis. We have these pathologies that have been identified in the literature, such as the premature industrialization, meaning that some countries, instead of having this process, the canonical process of structural change, they don't really develop manufacturing and industry, and they just skip into low productive service sector. And also another pathology is structural heterogeneity. However, structural change labor market outcomes in sub-Saharan African countries are far less understood, let alone the gender effects of these processes. However, we already have the theory in order to study structural change from a gender perspective. We can go back to the very early studies of structural change, like Kuznets, Lewis, and Bosserop, and also consider the work of some of the wonderful feminist macroeconomists that some of them are here with us, where they started to look at structural adjustment programs from the IMF in specific countries, and they started to consider how these structural changes and these structural adjustment programs have different effects for women and men in global South countries. In this paper, what I'm going to analyze is the structural change impact in gender sectoral segregation in sub-Saharan African countries. And I'm going to consider two different explanations behind this sectoral segregation within different sectors in these countries. One idea behind why we see women going through specific sectors and men going to other type of sectors is the comparative advantage argument. Productivity levels, rising productivity are related to reducing physical requirements, and this is considered using this comparative advantage argument that this leads to an increasing demand for women's work. However, feminist scholars have considered other more radical considerations behind this gender segregation and consider how gender stereotypes, discrimination, and competition for good jobs that mainly are in industrial jobs in the process of structural change until the later stages of high productive sectors, how these jobs, women through these gender stereotypes and discrimination are limited the entrance in these jobs. So I'm going to consider these two different explanations behind gender segregation and see which one, or using econometrics, which one seems to be more plausible. I'm going to use data for 10 industries, using 10 industries operating in 11 sub-Saharan African countries using the Africa Sector Database, elaborated by Debris and co-authors. This database provides formal and informal employment. This is highly important because we know that women concentrate in the informal and vulnerable employment. So looking only at formal employment will really leave a lot of things that are going on gender gaps out of the analysis. Gender sectoral segregation has been already considered in the literature, a paper by Borowan and Claesen, and they saw that gender sectoral segregation is relatively low in sub-Saharan African countries. At the same time, they identify, as I do in this paper, that female labor force participation is persistently low in these countries. So here I'm going to consider this hypothesis that we might see nonlinear relationships between aggregate labor productivity and gender segregation. I'm going to use an IB strategy. I'm going to instrument female labor force participation using lags of the household composition, using size, composition, and age of the household, the average age of the household, to consider how the dissimilarity index, that is going to be the measure of gender segregation, is affected by aggregate labor productivity and the square term, meaning that there might be some nonlinearities. Of course, I include the different control variables that are empirically informed from the previous literature. Our outcome variable here is going to be the dissimilarity index that refers to segregation. Something that is kind of misleading in the literature is when we talk about how women and men segregate and concentrate in different sectors. One thing is to talk about segregation that really considers the distribution of male employment and women employment and how this differs. And another thing is to talk about representation, that is really about the share of women out of all employees in that precise sector. We are going to use this Index of dissimilarity from Duncan and Duncan, supercanonical, superuse, gives the percentage of women who should trade sectors in order to bring about a gender an equal gender distribution between sectors. So just to give you an idea of, in order to really consider segregation and representation, two different things. This is important because in the next paper, I'm gonna refer to shares of women that is gonna be representation. So here we have the percentage of women out of the female employment in each sector. These are the 10 sectors that I have: utilities, till, agriculture. Then the percentage of male employment, and then the relative labor productivity. So we see that in sub-Saharan Africa, in this subset of sub-Saharan African countries, agriculture makes a huge percentage of both female and male employment. At the same time, agriculture has a very low relative labor productivity. In contrast, finance and business services is highly productive relative to other sectors, and mainly, there is a higher concentration of male employment there relative to women. And again, so basically this is the idea. This dissimilarity index, what makes is to, I don't have a pointer, right? Yeah.
No, you don't. You do not have a pointer.
No, why not? Surprise. So the similarity index is this difference. Here there is no difference in manufacturing. So taking these differences, and then I think maybe my point is maybe already made. So here is how aggregate labor productivity and the index of dissimilarity. Here is the the percentage of women who should go to another sector in order to have the same distribution of male employment. So we see here a lot of heterogeneity. We see Zambia is a huge outlier. Over this period of time, between 1960 till 2010, Zambia increased labor productivity in an incredible path. So we see this negative relationship for Zambia, but not for others. And also we see some kind of non-linearities for the case of South Africa. So I performed the econometrics, and this is the result. We see that at initial levels of aggregate labor productivity increases, this makes a negative effect in the dissimilarity index. 1% increase in aggregate labor productivity is associated with a minus 0.6% in the dissimilarity index. However, if we increase this 1% of aggregate labor productivity at different previous levels of aggregate labor productivity, we see that this effect is still negative, but reduces in magnitude. For high-level aggregate labor productivity, the relationship is no longer significant. So I'm going to give you some of the takeaways for this first structural change paper. I found a significant role of structural change that is proxied by aggregate labor productivity gains in gender sectoral segregation in South African, in a subset of sub-Saharan African countries using IB strategy and a higher industry level desegregation than previous works. Gender-sensitive analysis and empirical analysis using, for instance, in my case, household composition and size, are useful to disentangle the production and production sides of structural change, even though I am not really tackling unpaid work here, as it's suggested by Elson in her last book. So basically, I found non-linearities. Initial increases of productivity lead to more equal distribution of sectoral employment, but further increases of productivity might unleash gender competition for specific sectors. Just to wrap up these papers, structural change can be seen as a dynamic process, a la Pacinetti, if you want, on that the economic development processes are not static, but rather dynamic processes. driven by continuous structural changes and composition of output factor endowments, or even technological change or technological progress. Speaking of which, this is my second paper that I wanted to talk to you. It's Robots and Women and Men, as its title says. It's going to be about robots. It's for comments in feminist economics. This is going to be an alarming thing. 2/3 of Europeans believe that robots and AI will destroy more jobs than create new ones. Gender consequences of robotization remain relatively underexplored, and evidence is inconclusive. Generally, the focus of these papers are case studies for the US or rich countries. They use aggregate levels and mainly focus on gender wage gaps. In this paper, what I want to talk about, when I want to analyze is whether and how industrial robots associate with share of women in manufacturing industries. Right now, we are no longer talking about gender segregation, we are talking about representation in different sectors. The share of women out of all the employees in that precise sector. And I'm gonna focus on manufacturing, because it's the most robotized sector in the industry, in the economy, and I'm gonna use different industries within manufacturing. I'm gonna bring about mainly two different strands of the literature. I'm gonna draw on the literature on the employment effects of robotization, like Acemoglu and Restrepo and their co-authors. I'm gonna also draw on the defeminization of the manufacturing, an idea, a body of literature that has been developed in feminist macroeconomics, in which they found that technological upgrading and labor productivity gains are associated with reducing the share of women in industrial jobs. I'm gonna add a little bit to these previous strands of the literature in order to consider to what extent levels of female labor force participation matter in the effect of robots, or more generally technological change, in the share of women in this specific sector that is manufacturing. Some of the recent literature saw that at high levels of female labor force participation, AI and robots unleash positive effects for women. Relatively less happy story is what we found from feminist macroeconomics, that they found that high levels of female labor force participation are associated with more defeminization of industrial jobs. 10 minutes, woof. Okay, I'm gonna speed a little bit. So I created this panel database, which I have 11 manufacturing industries for 14 countries during 1993 and 2015. Here is the sample of countries. They are mostly emerging. Most of them, they are export-oriented. There is a huge outlier that is Japan, that is the worldwide robot exporter. Dropping Japan from this analysis does not change the results. I'm going to use an interactive dynamic panel data modeling, which I consider that previous realizations of female shares in the manufacturing affect current shares of the manufacturing. I'm going to include robots, female labor force participation, and the interaction between them. I'm going to use a classical Bartik-Sock type measure of robotization that you have here, using the hyperbolic sine transformation. And something that I am really happy about is that I managed to get data on the level of employees from 1980. I am collecting data from many different sources. Some of them start in 1993, like the measure for robots started in 1993. But for UNIDO, that's the source of data for manufacturing industry, like how many women are in its manufacturing industry, this data starts in 1980. So I managed to give this share with this starting point of 1980. It's also done in the reference literature in robotization. So we I kind of believe that this makes me a little bit of exogeneity. Anyways, I'm going to use generalized method moments, and I will endogenize the key variables. So here is a little bit how the industrial robots per 10,000 employees look like, and also the share of women in its industry. We see that, generally speaking, automotive that is highly robotized happens to be less feminized, but textiles that is hugely feminized has no robots or very low level of robotization. Here is the long difference correlation from the from the first data point to the last one, and we cannot really see. We see a negative relationship, but we cannot extract any information here. Here is the computation, the classical ugly table of regression analysis, in which I want to draw your attention on the last one, that here I use difference GMM, where I endogenize robotization and female labor force participation. And what I found is that robots are significantly associated with female shares in industries in the manufacturing, and the interaction between robotization and female labor force participation is negative. So maybe we can see this better in a graph. In the back of this graph, you have the histogram for female labor force participation with the density. And here, this straight line, you have the marginal effects for 1 percentage point increase in robots. And we see that it's positive, but it reduces as we move far in the female labor force participation line. Conclusions: robotization seems to affect, at least based on this database and these countries, seems to affect the share of women in manufacturing. These results align with previous literature, but add this confrontation between female labor force participation. The context matters, something that you might have to go to the paper to read because I don't have time. Other relevant factors that I can identify is the country income levels and sectoral productivity levels matter for this relationship. 5 minutes, okay. So, and this leads me to the last paper that is co-authored with Ipek Ikarajan. We started this as colleagues in Sapienza University 6 years ago already. It's how gender intersects with paid and unpaid work status in political ideology, evidence from homemakers in Spain. Just to give like an interlude between what I was saying before and what I'm going to talk about now is that job displacing effects of technological change and structural change can affect political attitudes. This is something that is found in the literature of political science. And gender differentials impact of these technological change and structural change have been understudied. Gender gaps in political ideology, usually they are measured in this heuristic Likert type scale, from 1 being super leftist, 10 being super rightist, transformed from traditional gaps where women were more right-wing to modern gaps where women are more left-wing in most Western countries since the 80s. Evidence for Italy and Turkey showed that this right-winging for women is really related to the labor market status of these women. So we consider this previous evidence for Italy and Turkey, and we use monthly survey using individual data from Spain, monthly. This is something that I want to highlight, from 1993 till 2019, and we showed that Spain adopted a modern gap, meaning that women are more on the left than men as of 2018. And this was mainly driven by women who are in the paid workforce. We are going to use an IB strategy, profit models using the probability. The dependent variable is going to be the probability of being left-wing. Just to give you the evolution of political ideology in Spain, here women are in blue and men are in red, just to give you like a little bit of a cognitive dissonance of the color palette. So we see that, over the period, women were more on the right. Here is higher values mean right-wing position, lower values left-wing positions. It was not until 2018, really, where women started to be more left-wing than men. We do some calculations, I mean, the IB strategy profit model that I showed to you, and when we separate women and men in the labor force and women and men who are not in the labor force, we see here that this is the probability of being left-wing. So men have 30% probability when they are not in the labor force to be left-wing, whereas when women are not in the labor force, they have less probability. And this reverses for when both are in the labor force. One of the conclusions is that the polarization between women and men in the paid workforce is lower. Just to go through the conclusions of the whole talk, structural change and technological change lead to profound gender differences that can distort gender-equal sustainable economic development and strategies. We can identify some nonlinearities and dynamic processes that might contingent on specific factors. Initial gains might get disrupted by increasing competition and new forms of discrimination. As of the industrial policies that we can derive from these industrial implications, the policy implications that we can derive is that industrial policies should be accompanied by gender-aware assessments, at least from one side, like considering the distribution of the job displacing effects of structural change and technological change, and also the gender composition of newly created jobs through technological augmentation. Structural change and technological change lead to job displacing effects that can fuel gender political polarization and mechanisms these are mechanisms that we should explore in further research. I cannot go back. I cannot go back and forth. Okay. So, yeah, my last words is I think feminist macroeconomics is a perfect platform to consider not only gender differences between women and men, but also going beyond the gender binary and consider differences in labor market outcomes from LGBTQ plus people, as is done by budgets and co-authors. Yeah, so don't have time.